I have long maintained the position that free speech, or the expansive free speech that we see in the United States of America, can only exist because America has been the global hegemonic superpower. And as America's power on the global stage wanes, okay, as is no longer the only game in town, you will see more restrictions. You will see the true limitations of free speech. I don't mean that we've had like expansive free speech or free speech always has existed in America. Of course it hasn't. Look no further than this past year where 3,500 college students were arrested on campuses for the crime of protesting against Israel's apartheid regime and Israel's genocide. That is antithetical to free speech, right? That is the exact opposite, because free speech is not about like saying whatever you want without any sort of repercussions on private platforms or whatever. Free speech is protecting you from government suppression. So when you get arrested for the crime of protesting, which is constitutionally protected, you are experiencing that immediate violation. What are you going to do if you get censored? I mean, I'm a leftist. That is always a possibility. That's something that I've thought about and had to actively think about my entire career. There's not much I can do about that. The reality of the matter is, any sort of anti-capitalist sentiment, no matter how non-radical it appears, okay, no matter how normal it appears, actually, the more normal it appears, the worse, honestly, the more dangerous, is always going to be threatening to the bottom line of our corporate oligarchs. So there is always going to be some semblance of suppression. BDS laws that have made it illegal to protest Israel is a direct violation of First Amendment rights in this country. And yet they've existed in perpetuity, right? Boycott, divestment, and sanctions on the state of Israel. In the state of Texas, for example, if you want to be a public school teacher, you have to sign a piece of paper that says you'll never boycott Israel. You'll never demand sanctions on Israel. You'll never demand divestment from Israel. And they exist in 32 plus states in this nation right now. These laws were written by the pro-Israeli lobby. So understand that there has always been limits to free speech, like real free speech. After all, this is the country where the McCarthyist trials happened. The Red Scare happened. That was a direct violation. That was government prosecution for people exercising their freedom of assembly, for people exercising their speech, for people openly saying that they subscribe to a certain ideology that the government thought was inappropriate and unacceptable. Look no further than what this country has done to revolutionary black organizers and activists and leaders. They've assassinated them. They've jailed them. That is a direct violation of free speech. And in the modern era, look no further than what the government has done to anti-Israel protesters. That is yet another violation of free speech. But having said that, while those sorts of restrictions have always existed, whether it be punishing whistleblowers, real whistleblowers, not fake ones, or punishing activists, that's always existed. What you must understand is that the silly types of free speech restrictions that you hear about in like China, for example. Oh, you can't compare Xi Jinping to Winnie the Pooh. That kind of stuff, those kinds of restrictions had not existed in the United States of America. And part of the reason why they had not is because America is so powerful that those sorts of silly things, that level of control, that level of censorship was never seen as a necessity. It's not even true, by the way. It doesn't matter. Okay, the reality of the matter is, fuck the Winnie the Pooh stuff, but yeah, the Chinese social media platforms do have more rigorous control. The Chinese government definitely surveils certain speech, and the Chinese government is obviously more combative towards political dissidents. This much is true. In the United States of America, there are still obviously criminal penalties that apply for people exercising their First Amendment rights, absolutely, in direct violation of the First Amendment, obviously. But the permission structure is like the bandwidth for it, and the permission for what you can and can't say is far more expansive. But here's the difference. The reason why it is far more expansive in America is because America is the global superpower. It has been the only game in town in perpetuity. Understand that. That is the only way. That is the only reason why America can be like so comfortable with political dissidents, because America sees political dissidents as powerless ultimately until now. Because as the situation worsens, as the collapse becomes inevitable, you will see the American government start taking actions like this. And I think trying to ban TikTok in this way was a pretty clear-cut indicator of that. Because if you've ever heard me talk about like free speech limitations in countries that are outside of the sphere of American influence, you've already heard me say that yes, of course, Cuba, for example, treats political dissidents with criminal penalties. But Cuba, on the other hand, has constantly been in a state of war since the Cuban Revolution, a state of war against the largest superpower on the planet that has unjustifiably placed Cuba under a blockade, a country that consistently tries to interfere in the politics of Cuba, right? So while I disagree with this on principle, while I disagree with any sort of limitation on free speech on principle, I do understand from a realistic perspective why certain states would apply certain restrictions to free speech. And those restrictions have existed in the United States of America in times of war, especially. Speaking out against any sort of war initiatives would land you in jail during World War I. That's why Eugene Debs actually went to prison. Speaking out against war in World War II also landed you in prison. Speaking out against war during Vietnam also landed you in prison. And speaking out against war right now, even though it is not a draft-style state violence in the same way that we have seen in Vietnam, you still see people experiencing criminal repercussions for it. So, obviously, when push comes to shove, when times are tough, the American government absolutely has scaled back its principled approach to freedom of speech. What point are you trying to make here? Can you bring this back to something key here? I am. My point is the same, which is that the limits to what is permissible speech are going to get more and more restrictive. That's it. As America loses its grip of power at the global stage, you will start seeing our politicians panic and increase the mechanisms of enforcement. And that is where we're at now. Permissible speech in the United States of America and in Western nations, for the most part, have often protected far-right speech. It has never had that same level of protection for leftist speech in general, anti-capitalist speech in general. As a matter of fact, it's more often than not used and weaponized against communists, socialists, trade unionists. Okay? That's why historically fascist movements have always gotten police protection, whether it be in the United States of America or in England or anywhere else. When fascists march on the streets, cops march alongside them. When socialists fight back, the cops brutalize the anti-fascists. This happened under the first Trump administration as well, and it will certainly happen in the second Trump administration.